Good. You can be seated. Thank you. Hey, Tina. Tina. Are you going to ask number?
That are unique to this case. So we have our, when I ask you the questions, we're all on the same page as far as the definition. Okay?
Okay.
Okay. First of all, we use the term autopsy. Tell us what an autopsy is.
Well, an autopsy means to see for oneself. It's a medical, surgical procedure involving the external and internal examination of a deceased human body, and to try to determine why the person is deceased. It's that simple.
Okay. You mentioned to us what a forensic pathologist is. Can you just go ahead and remind them and expand on that just a little bit? Because that's the role you're playing today, correct?
Yes.
All right.
Well, a forensic pathologist is a medical doctor that basically works at a medical examiner office most of the time. And what we do is we're experts on evaluating injuries of the human body. Most all the time, those are on deceased people's. My current practice is virtually exclusively with decedents, 99.99% of the time, I'd say. So we do an examination, we do a full death investigation. So for a death investigation, you need to do an autopsy, of course, but also there's the information, the context of the death. So you could give me a gunshot wound to the chest, and it could be an accident manner. It could be an unintentional injury. Somebody could have been shot accidentally. It could be a suicide where somebody shot themselves on purpose, or it could be a homicide where another person shot them. You need the context of it to figure it out. And also it helps with directionality and also with cause of death. So you have to do a full death investigation involving circumstances and autopsy, and then we certify the cause of death. So we fill out a death certificate that gives a cause of death and manner of death. That's basically the whole job. And then I think we have sort of a public health role. What's your homicide rate in your area? What's your suicide rate? Are your drug ODs going up or down? What problem does your community have that's killing people? I think that's really one of our main purposes of spending public money and doing all this work, is to try to help people and improve the health of a community.
When we talk about an autopsy, and as a forensic pathologist, as the autopsy is being performed, are you documenting your findings? Contemporaneous with what you see? Yes,
I use voice-to-text software, so as I'm examining the body, I'm doing a dictation and it's putting it right into an electronic document.
Does the autopsy examination include both an external and an internal?
Yes.
Does the autopsy examination include not only report, but photographs?
Yes.
Now, let me talk about photograph just a little bit. You mentioned that 99% of your case is with a deceased. Is it acceptable and common practice that a forensic pathologist can use photographs and look at them and derive certain information from them as if they were looking at the body itself?
Yes, I mean, it's routine. For instance, I do the photographs because it's for preservation of what occurred at the autopsy, certain important aspects. You do the photographs that you may have to present in court. I mean, I could pass away in a car accident and not be here to testify. One of my colleagues would use my report and my photographs to testify in my place. So that's one of the reasons. And also we do the photographs as a demonstration in court to show people like yourselves what we saw. And they're demonstrative aids. They, represent what we saw. And it's pretty routine.
Right. Along those same lines, you mentioned that doing an investigation and placing things in content is important in your work, correct?
Yes.
Is it also acceptable for a forensic pathologist to use photographs of an injured party that did not die, but was injured at the same time as the deceased, to draw certain opinions and conclusions?
It's happened. It's not very often. I mean, my job is cause and manner of death, but I have been shown photographs of other people, like the ones around the other person, maybe the perpetrator, and they ask me, what do you think of these hands, or what do you think of this injury here? I mean, I guess the most common would be the person, like the suspect's hands would probably be the most common one, or somebody else was injured. That happens. It's not frequent. I'd say, a couple of dozen times in my career, maybe a few more.
Right. Have you had the life experience of being involved in a case where there is, in fact, one gunshot and there's multiple intervening objects before the projectile finally hits the torso of an individual?
Yes.
And have you had the life experience in that same scenario where the intervening object is not only an extremity of the deceased, but someone in close proximity of that individual?
Yes, I've had, other limbs, the person's own limbs, the person's own legs, doors, jewelry they're wearing, clothing, objects in pockets. So, when a bullet travels towards someone, it'll penetrate everything, unless it's like steel or body armor or something, eventually scrubbing velocity at every layer of something it goes through to eventually hit the person. So a lot of times bullets, I've had them go through walls and kill people. So many different possible scenarios on what it can or will not penetrate.
Would that also include extremities of other individuals close to the deceased?
It's happened, yes. Somebody else's hand is quite frequent. Sometimes people put even the shooters will put the bullet through their own hand. But the most frequent intermediate target, I think, is clothing, obviously. If you're wearing clothes are an intermediate target between the bullet and your body. I guess the next most frequent would be your own extremity, putting your hand up, the arm or leg is in the way, and the bullet goes right through your own arm and then into you. Through here is very frequent, and then into your chest. So that's probably the most frequent.
I mentioned to you, or asked you whether or not you've been allowed to render opinion as to cause of death. Are you limited in as far as the cause of death, as far as how it's described? As an example, natural.
Yeah, cause of death is different. What you're describing is manner of death. So cause of death
I apologize, I used the wrong word.
Okay.
That's why you're up there.
Cause of death is, it's the illness or injury that leads to the physiologic process that results in death. So there's many of those: breast cancer, heart attack, brain tumors, bullet wounds, lightning strikes. So probably 1 billion of those. Different ways of wording it as well. But manner of death, you only have 5. And that's based upon the context of the death, or how the injury or lack of it. If there's no injury, it'll be a natural. But if there's an injury, you have manners of death that you can assign. There's 5 of them. One, the most common manner of death is natural. There's no injury. You died of natural disease, heart attack, cancer, brain tumor, stuff like that. Then there's homicide. One person killed you. Person's killed you. One person kills another. And then there's accident, car accident, lightning strike, shark attack. Those would be unintentional injuries, acts of God. So that's accident. Then the other is suicide. Somebody brings about their own death. They hang themselves, they shoot themselves. And then the last one would be, I can't assign a manner of death. I can't decide between 2 or 3 of them because I'm not sure if it's a suicide or an accident, or I'm not sure what occurred. I've got a skeleton laying out in a cornfield and they're just bleached bones. I have no idea what happened. So I will assign a manner of death of undetermined, or now it's being certified as cannot be determined. You just can't tell what the context was, or you can't tell between 2 different manners. And that's your limit. And it's a medical statistical determination. Vital Statistics in Jacksonville uses it to create a report that shows this county's homicide rate, for instance, or this county's number of accidents they have, things like that.
we're going to be using some terms, medical terms, and I'm going to ask you to define some of those that may come up during our direct examination. And there's no particular order. We'll just take them one at a time. Would you please explain to the jury and define what is a penetrating gunshot wound?
Okay. I classify penetrating gunshot wounds as the bullet goes in and doesn't come out. So there's a hole where the bullet went in, and inside the person is a bullet or bullet pieces. So it penetrated the body. If it goes all the way through, I call it perforating. So there'd be an entrance hole and an exit hole. It perforated the body.
Okay. I want to talk about body position. There's specific terms used in your profession, anterior and posterior. Explain to us what that is and the difference between the two.
Well, anterior is front, the front of the body, the face, the chest, the front of the legs. Posterior is the back side of the body, your back, the back of your thighs, your calves. So posterior, anterior.
When you get to the extremities, is there something you have to kind of keep in mind?
Yeah, I can show you if you want.
May he just step up so you can show the
Yes,
jury?
you can.
With the upper extremities, because we can do this with our forearms, we can move them. So if you're talking about anterior, it's the body in the anatomic position, which is palms forward. So all this is anterior. This is posterior. So this, when I'm describing stuff, everything is, the body is like this. So if I say right or left and anterior, posterior, keep in mind it's like this. It's the decedent's right, the decedent's left.
Along those same lines, let's talk about anatomical position. We're going to use that term describing certain locations and how people are. Tell us what anatomical position is.
I just did, I think.
Well, would it include leaning, squatting in different positions?
Well, when I'm describing the wound, I do it in the anatomical position, but, when the injury occurred, you can be in a different position. I mean, the human body is not the Tin Man from the Wizard of Oz, standing like this, always in the anatomic position. The person can do this, bend over, twist, move their arms this way. So when I'm describing wounds and directions of bullets and stuff like that, it may not make sense unless you keep in mind I'm describing it anatomically, but what position were they in when the injury occurred may seem kind of confusing, but when you put it all together, now, I see how it went through here, then it hit here. It makes more sense when you consider the injuries in the description in the context of where the person was, how the person was positioned, where their arms were, and what they were doing when the injury occurred.
One of the terms we're going to be talking about is intermediate range grazing gunshot wound. I know that's a mouthful. Break it down for us and tell me what we're talking about.
I think a lot of these terms are unnecessarily complex, but it's kind of common sense. A lot of my work is nice in that it's common sense. Grazed gunshot wound, that's very descriptive. It means that the bullet flying through the air grazed the skin. So it makes like a trough or a cut, gouges the skin. It doesn't fully go in the body. It just causes a skin wound or soft tissue injury. Now, if there's ones that'll almost go in and kind of tunnel under the skin, but then there's ones that just touch the edge of the skin, and there's certain characteristics of that. And when you're talking intermediate range, so we have types of wounds: penetrating, perforating, and graze. When you're talking, then you talk range of fire. There's 3 ranges of fire that forensic pathologists describe, and that's what we see on the skin. We base that on the skin and the body. You have contact range, where the muzzle's pressed up right on the skin when the gun is fired. The muzzle of the gun is right there on the skin. And then you have intermediate range, That's where the muzzle's away from the skin. Maybe like say half an inch or an inch away. And all the way out to 18 to 24 inches, that's intermediate range. And then beyond 24, 18 inches, you have distant range, or we call it undetermined range. And I can explain each one of those.
Okay. Another term we're going to be using is stippling. Tell us what that is in your profession.
Stippling is it's also called powder tattooing. And it is a hallmark of an intermediate range gunshot wound. And the reason that you have stippling, also known as powder tattooing, associated with an intermediate range gunshot wound is that when a gun is fired, obviously the bullet comes out. Pretty common sense. But there's gunpowder that has been ignited and it is burning and it's creating gas that pushes the bullet out. So out of the muzzle comes bullet, out of the muzzle comes flame, out of the muzzle comes gas, and since the guns are not 100% efficient, they don't burn all the powder. There's also pellets or little fragments of powder that come out. Some even come out slightly ahead of the bullet. But so you have the bullet coming out, and then I have this dust of powder particles that come out. And they have energy. And if the gun is sufficiently close to the skin, the bullet will go through and the powder will hit the skin, embed in the skin, and actually make a tattoo, very similar to getting an actual tattoo. And you'll have little bits of powder in there, and you'll have little bit of hemorrhage here. And we call it stippling or powder tattooing. It will happen when the gun is, let's say, close to the skin, an inch, all the way out to maybe 18 inches, maybe even to 24, depending on the gun.
And that takes us back to your definition of contact, intermediate, and distant or undetermined.
That's correct.
While we're talking about the stippling, and I mentioned from close to contact to intermediate to distance undetermined, this cone, is it like a shotgun? You know, it's not rifled. Does it come out as further you go, it spreads further, or does it stay a direct path like the bullet?
It's very similar to like a shotgun being fired with birdshot. Very similar, although much less powerful. You have little particles, like maybe you have, sometimes gunpowder is ball powder. It's like little balls. And it comes out, and what it does is you'll have a cone of this stuff come out. If you're closer, the stippling around the wound will be really tight. And as you get further away, it gets looser and looser, and the stippling is more faint, and it's less dense, and it's more spread out. And eventually, when you're further enough away, again, depending on the caliber of the gun, the barrel length, the type of powder, the speed of burning of different powders, eventually the powder, since it's so lightweight, the wind resistance, the air resistance, causes it to decelerate, and it'll not have sufficient velocity to penetrate and stick into the skin. So at like say 18 to 24 inches, it loses all its momentum. It may dust the skin and just fall right off. But if you get closer, it's got enough energy to stick in. And you'll see it as you get further away, it gets thinner and thinner, fainter and fainter, and more spread out until eventually you don't get it anymore when you're further enough away.
And that does assist you in making an estimate as far as distance from muzzle to target.
Yes, you can make a reasonably scientific, educated theory about how far within a range.
One last term that we will maybe use is bullet wipe. What is that?
Well, bullet wipe, again, you know, you're firing a bullet down a barrel, and guns are not always the cleanest thing in the world. They're not emission free. So you can have, depending on the bullet type, the cleanliness of the gun, how often it was shot, how often it was cleaned, the bullet can actually have soot or dirt or even copper or lead on the side of it that's loose, and when it penetrates into the skin, no matter what the distance, you can have a little bit of that dirt, soot, whatever, wiped on the skin.
Would that be one of the indications trying to distinguish a bullet wound from some other type of puncture wound?
What was that now?
I'm sorry. Would that be one of the things that you would consider in distinguishing a gunshot wound from a puncture wound?
Yeah, it does help. It does help. That would be, yeah, if you have, and also when bullets go in, they have a, they tend to, particularly if they're flying straight, it's really nice to see this. They push in, even though they're going really fast and they're making a hole, they tend to push in, and what you end up with is a marginal abrasion around the entry. So you have a hole, and then around that you may have anywhere from a 1, 2, or 3 millimeter abrasion, like a skin knee, kind of like a little donut of abrasion around it, depending on the bullet, the gun, etc.
Let's go ahead and talk about the facts in this case. On January 14th, 2014, a little after noontime, did you have an occasion to conduct an autopsy on Chad Oulson?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, would you read the stipulation?
Ladies and gentlemen, as I've read to you before, I'm going to read you the stipulation of instruction. When lawyers agree that certain facts are true, that is called a stipulation of fact. You must accept stipulated facts as having been proven. However, the significance of these facts, as with all facts, is for you to decide. In this case, the stipulated facts that you must accept as true is that the counsel for defense and state hereby stipulate and agree that the individual who was shot on January 13th, 2014 inside Theater 10 at Cobb Theater is that of the alleged victim in the above styled case, Chad Wayne Oulson, a human being, and that he is dead.
You mentioned to us that contemporaneous with the autopsy, it's your practice to dictate as you make your findings and also take photographs.
That's correct.
Prior to coming in the courtroom today, did you in fact have an opportunity to review your notes, your autopsy reports, and the photographs that you took in this particular case?
Yes.
Also, prior to coming into the courtroom today, did you have an opportunity to look at photographs of injuries to a hand that was that you were provided information belonged to Nicole Oulson, the wife of Chad Oulson?
Yes.
Okay. At the time that you conducted the autopsy, did you know that the facts of the case included one gunshot?
Yes.
At the time of the autopsy, did you know that Mrs. Oulson's hand was also injured by that same one gunshot that killed Mr. Oulson?
I believe so. I think I heard that anecdotally.
Okay. Let's go to January 13th, 2014. Were you notified by the hospital in Wesley Chapel that Mr. Oulson had died?
My office was, I have investigators that work in Pasco County, and Dustin Daly, one of my investigators, was notified.
Right. The information that you originally obtained, did it indicate that Dr. Contrell had pronounced him dead at the hospital?
That is in the medical record, yes. It was, that physician did pronounce him dead.
And what is your procedure once you've notified that an individual has been pronounced dead and possibility? And what is your procedure once you're notified?
Well, under 406.11 and 406.12, any person that knows a case like this where there's a gunshot wound, is obligated to report it to the medical examiner. What we do is we do a death investigation. We get the circumstances, and then the body is transported by my employees to the office. We do weigh and measure the body, do an external exam, and the external exams are pretty routine. What you're looking for is signs of what may have caused death. In a case like Mr. Oulson's, it's unfortunate for him, but at the same time, it's kind of obvious, what caused his death. He had an obvious single gunshot wound of his chest that really caused his death. He also had a grazing gunshot wound to his right wrist area.
Once you are part of that process where you go and you pick up Mr. Oulson's body, bring it back to the medical examiner's office, is it your practice that your office assigns a unique medical examiner report number to the case? In particular, in this particular case, was that number 5140066?
Yes.
Would that report be reflected on the autopsy?
Yes.
And would that number also be used to reference any photographs that you may have taken during the autopsy?
Yes.
Would it also reference to any foreign objects that you would have removed from the body?
Yes.
It's all cross-referenced,
Yes.
that number, all right. Now, I mentioned photographs. Prior to coming into the courtroom today, did you assist the Office of the State Attorney in selecting photographs that you felt would be helpful in explaining your testimony to the jury?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I approach?
You may. Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry. I thought we did look at them. My apologies. Let me show you what's been marked for identification as JJJ, JPEG number M5140066-017. I'll also show you what's been marked for identification as KKK, JPEG number M5140066-022. And also marked for identification LLL, JPEG photograph M5140066-032. Would you look at each of those photographs and tell me if you recognize them?
Defense has no objection to the admission of those photos or the use of them in explaining.
Thank you.
testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Michaels.
Yes, these are photographs of Mr. Oulson shortly before the autopsy was performed, showing his wounds.
And would those photographs be helpful in explaining your testimony to the jury?
Yes.
Let's begin by discussing the external examination. Is it part of the autopsy to take certain measurements, height, weight of the deceased?
Yes.
Did you do that in this case?
Yes.
The height of Mr. Oulson, what was it determined to be
He
by
was
you?
76 inches or 6'4".
How did you make that determination?
With a ruler. We just measure him as he's there on the table.
Okay. As far as the weight,
We weigh him on the table, subtracting the weight of the table, At death, he weighed 205 pounds.
So let's talk about the external examination. When you conducted it, I want to begin with the torso area, then we'll work to the extremities, okay?
Okay.
All right, so let's begin with the torso area. During the external examination, did you in fact find an injury in the torso?
Yes.
Okay, and what was that?
He had a gunshot entrance wound of his left side of his chest, basically over where your heart would be.
Now, what I'd like to do is, first of all, let's kind of place it where it is. Did you take measurements so that you could go back and recreate where it was specifically in the chest area?
It typically, whatever the wound, if there's a significant wound, it could be any type of wound, will orient the wound generally. And what I do is I measure the distance from the top of the head, and then I typically measure from the level of the shoulder area, and then I measure how far to the right or the left of the midline the wound is.
Okay.
So you're getting a reasonably understandable measurement of where it is, not just on the left side of the chest. A little bit more specific that way.
Did you do that in this case?
Yes.
And what were your measurements?
16.5 inches below the top of the head, and then 7.5 inches below the level of the mid-shoulders, and then 1.5 inches to the left of the anterior midline. That would be this, right in the midline here. So 1.5 inches over.
And why do you measure from the head down?
Well, it's the closest place. I mean, I know a lot of people measure from the feet up, even when the injury's in the head, but that's less accurate. What I always typically do, if you want to know how far the wound was from the sole of the foot, say, you just take their height and subtract the distance from the head, and you get the sole of the foot. If the injury is below the waist, I'll do it from the sole of the foot. It's just, you're trying to orient it to the body best you can.
And what was it about the injury that you saw from just external examination that led you to conclude that it was a gunshot wound?
Again, the circumstances. I mean, maybe you could say, knowing that people have to report it to the ME and they say, this gentleman has a gunshot wound. And then I see the wound, I do an x-ray on him before doing the autopsy, and he's got a bullet core and a jacket clearly visible in the x-ray, and I've got a hole that a little bit of an atypical look to it, and that's explainable, but he's been shot. It's 100% certainty this is a gunshot wound even before I opened his body.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Your Honor, at this time I would move into evidence marked for identification JJJ, next in order.
58. That'll be admitted as 58.
KKK, next in order.
59. It'll be admitted as 59.
And LLL.
60. It'll be admitted as state 60.
Your Honor, at this time may I publish the photograph, specifically State's Exhibit number 58. May the witness step down.
You may.
All right, would you step down with me, please? Now, let me show you.
You may. I probably will too. Hang on a minute. Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Barton.
Let me show you State's Exhibit number 58. Is this one of the photographs that you selected that would be helpful in explaining your testimony?
Yes.
I'm going to hold it for you so that you can point and talk. But please explain to us, where is the entrance wound?
This is the entrance room, right above the ruler.
All right. There's another object about the 11 o'clock position. What is that?
Well, it's an abrasion It's like a impact scrape, I think. It's got a little bruise around it. In my opinion, it's probably most likely related to the gunshot wound. Maybe it's because he had this graze first, and I think we'll explain that. But it may be flesh or something coming out of one of the intermediate targets and hitting his chest. It's also possible that it could be something from medical intervention. Sometimes you'll see when people are being CPR, they'll have scrapes or things. It's a little bit unusual to see that. I would favor it's probably related to the gunshot wound in some way. Maybe a piece of his own tissue hit his chest at high speed, or I don't want to be too blatant, but the other injured party may be something from her that hit his chest. It's not unusual to see that. And a little bit less likely, but reasonable, it could be something from people doing a bunch of CPR on him, and he did get CPR.
Now, as you look at the wound, and as a lay person, it's not perfectly round. Explain to us the shape that we have.
Well, the caliber of the gun, it's a handgun, it's a .380 automatic or semi-automatic, so bullets will fly generally right out of the gun if it hits a person. It's spinning perfectly. And at the range we're talking about, it's a flat trajectory. So it's going to make a nice punched out round hole if it hits the skin perpendicular. Nice punched out round hole. If it doesn't, it'll make an oval shaped hole. Really nice. This is very unusual looking. It's triangular kind of and weird looking. That's because this is a tumbling bullet. The bullet has already struck 2 intermediate targets, and it's at least doing this.
Okay. And that's the reason for the difference.
That's correct.
Okay. You may have a seat.
Are you gonna do any more right now?
No, we're going to go. No, but you will have to come back, I guess.
Okay, that's fine.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Ready, Your Honor? I want to continue with our discussion as far as the torso area and the gunshot wound to the chest. I want to go from external to internal. Did you, in fact, conduct an internal examination as it relates to the gunshot wound in the chest?
Yes.
And what were your findings?
Well, the bullet went through his skin. It went through the underneath his 4th rib and nicked his 4th rib. Then it went through his heart. And bullets are a lead core with a copper jacket around them. So a lot of times when a bullet passes through tissue, it'll shed the jacket. The jacket will come off, the lead core will continue. So in his heart was the jacket, and then the bullet continued and ended up in his right lung. I mean, the core of the bullet continued and ended up in his right lung.
Is there a way to determine front to back, back to front, left to right? Can you orientate the wound tract in a way to give us some idea later on in our discussions about where an individual was?
Within reason. I mean, I describe this as front to back. I mean, that's pretty easy. His front to his back. It also crossed, a little bit of a left to right trajectory. Bullets generally travel straight, but this, hits human flesh, it's wobbling, so it could deflect several degrees when it hit his wrist. Then it hits his spouse's fingers, could deflect a little bit, and then it goes into tissue. But generally, bullets fly straight with some caveats. Particularly lower velocity handgun bullets tend to fly straighter in tissue than some of the more high velocity ones.
During the autopsy, did you actually recover a foreign object?
Yes.
What was that?
Well, it was a medium caliber jacket of a bullet and a core of that bullet.
And where was it found?
Well, the core was in his right lung, near the midline, and his jacket was in his heart.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Let me show you State's Exhibit number 57. It has been opened. Would you look at that, please, sir? May I have to stand here for a moment, Your Honor? Do you recognize the package inside stakes exhibit number 57?
Yes, this is the envelope that I prepared and signed with this recovered material with my signature on the evidence tape and the date and the time.
Okay. And would that be the foreign object that you just described to the jury?
Yes.
What exhibit was that?
57, Your Honor.
57, thank you.
Let me talk a little bit about the wound itself and the organs that it impacted. Was the heart damaged by the projectile?
Yes.
If a person is shot and a projectile hits the heart, does the individual immediately drop to the ground, or is there some time delay?
Depends on the circumstances and what's going on in their head, you know. They don't have to drop. They can drop. I've been shot and just sit down, but, you know, I've had and know of and been consulted on cases where they run far. They do a lot of things, hundreds of feet. They can run, they can talk. So no, I mean, the human body can keep functioning for a period of time unless it's hit in the central nervous system. If you don't damage the brain or spinal cord, there's no guarantee the body's just going to drop. You can keep going.
Okay. Hypothetically, if someone was shot in the chest and then turned and then took several steps over 2, 3, 4 seconds and then collapsed, would that be consistent or inconsistent with the type of wound that Mr. Oulson sustained?
Consistent.
While that person, hypothetically, in that same situation, would that person still have the wherewithal to make statements?
Sure. Yeah, no, there's definitely could still talk, no doubt about it.
Okay. May I approach the witness?
You may.
I want to go to the extremities at this time. If you would refer to State's Exhibit number 59 and 60, what I'd like to do is start with 59, and let's discuss that, then we'll do 60.
Okay.
All right. State's Exhibit number 59, what is that?
That's a photograph of the, again, anatomical position, the lateral portion of his right hand and wrist.
Okay. Show us using your hand, what's the lateral?
It's right here.
Okay. Part of your autopsy, did you in fact examine that wound?
Yes.
Is it characterized as a grazed wound?
It is a classic grazed wound.
May the witness step down and use
He
his
may.
photograph to further his testimony?
Yes. Yes.
Your Honor, I would need to ask the court to instruct the prosecutor to not speak to the witness unless we're on the record
Okay.
during his testimony.
All right. Don't talk to the witness unless we're on the record.
Yes, Your Honor. Are we on the record?
We are.
Dr. Thogmartin, we're going to talk about both pictures so that the judge doesn't have to keep coming up and down, okay? Okay. All right, thank you. Let me show you State's Exhibit number 59. I'll hold it for you. Go ahead and explain to us what we're looking at.
Well, this is what it is right here, the wrist area, the top part, and what you're seeing there is the grazed gunshot wound. It's basically right here on the lateral side of his wrist. And if it's held like this, it's on the top. He's holding his arm like this, okay? Classic grazed gunshot wound.
Left or right hand?
Right hand.
Okay. Now we see some little red bumps, marks, whatever, just below it. What is that?
That's stippling. It's not a very good picture of it. The other picture is better. But that's the powder tattooing or stippling. That's gunpowder hitting the skin and embedding in the skin.
Why do we not see it in the area of the wound?
Because the gunshot wound is coming like this, going right across the top. And it's not going to be here. It's going to be on the side that's facing the gun. The gun's here, bullet's coming this way, powder's coming, it's here. So you're only going to see it in this area. You won't see it on the top because it's parallel to the direction of the flying powder. It's not going to stick into something. It's flying at the same direction as you understand. Like it's going to hit the front, it's not going to hit the top. It's flying over the top.
We're going to do the next photo. Let me show you State's Exhibit number 60. We talked about the term stippling, so we just did the grazed wound. Now, what does this picture represent?
This, you can see the
Let me
fingers.
just put it on right. State's Exhibit number 60.
This is again his right hand and forearm. The wound is up here. You can actually see kind of a little divot. This is kind of like the bullet's eye view or a gun eye view of it. You can see the trough or the divot that was cut by the bullet. And then all these red dots, that's powder tattooing or stippling. Unburned or partially burned gunpowder that came out of the gun and stuck in the skin, and you can see stuck in enough where actually the body's, has a little hemorrhage associated with it. A little bit of a red dot because blood vessels are broken under the skin, just like with a tattoo, if you go to a tattoo parlor.
And can the stippling be used as a factor to determine distance, muzzle to target?
Yes, automatically when you see stippling, this makes it an intermediate range of fire. So it could be, in the textbooks, it's 1 inch all the way out to 18 or even 24 inches. This is not 1 inch, in my opinion. I'd say if you asked me to make a scientific estimate of what it would be, I'd say anywhere from 4 to 15 would be within the realm of possibility, but it's hard to know. You have to know so many things. Ammunition, powder, all these different possibilities, and test it on human skin and you could get a more accurate range. But 4 to 15 is good. I think that would work.
Scientifically, do we test on human skin?
No, but you can have other things you test on, but it's not going to give you the same. I mean, maybe, I'm not aware of any really good test to duplicate powder tattooing on live human skin. And I think, doing it on anything alive would probably be bad.
Now, you refer to his hand as being an intermediate object.
Yes.
All right. Hypothetically, if there is a second intermediate object, the tattooing that we see on the second intermediate object can, where it is located, assist in orientating where one is in relation to the other because of the blockage of tattoo.
Right, you can see the amount of tattooing, the intensity of it, where it's located, and the fact that there's one gunshot wound. It's unique to be able to position a person's arm and one person's hand or arm and another person's hand and the wound all in one. So you can really, at the instant the bullet's flying, we know where at least two people's extremities are in relation to the torso of the decedent.
Please have a seat. When we began discussing the autopsy, I asked you whether or not you were aware that this was a one-shot case and whether or not you were aware that Mrs. Oulson was also injured by the same gunshot.
Yes.
You indicated anecdotally, yes, you were aware of that.
Yes.
Now, since the time of the autopsy, have you had an occasion to look at photographs that were taken approximately 2 days after Mrs. Oulson sustained her injury?
Yes.
And from reviewing those photographs, are you able to explain to us her hand position when her hand was injured by the same shot?
Yes.
All right. May I approach the witness?
You may.
I'm going to show you State's Exhibits 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18 that are in evidence. I'm just going to give you a chance to look at those photographs, and I'll have some questions for you. What I'd like for you to do, Dr. Thogmartin, would you select one of the photographs that you think would be helpful in describing the type of wound that Mrs. Oulson suffered so that you can describe it and explain it to the jury? All right. And would you also select a photograph that would assist you in explaining stippling as we did with Mr. Oulson? And if it requires more than one photograph to get all of her fingers in.
I think I can get by with 2.
All right. Your Honor, at this time, may he step down? May I use the 2 photographs for him to explain his testimony?
Yes, he can, and I have seen the photos, so you can show them to the jury. You guys, yes?
Right. As we discussed with Mr. Oulson, I have before you State's Exhibit number 15. Of course, you can orientate it the way, how do you want it orientated so you can?
I like it like that.
Okay. State's Exhibit number 15. All right. We talked about the type of wound as we did with Mr. Oulson and your findings in the autopsy. From the photograph, are you able to describe the type of wound that she received?
Well, this is a perforating gunshot wound of her left ring finger, right between the most distal knuckle and the middle one, okay? It goes right through that finger. And in this side, out the bottom side. And then grazes her pinky finger going this way, going kind of that way as I'm pointing, by the look of it.
Are there any other fingers that are damaged by the bullet?
Well, there's stippling on her hand.
We'll get to that in a second. Just the
No,
injury.
just those 2 fingers is all I see.
All right. And from the photograph, can you determine the path of the bullet?
Yes, in my opinion, it's coming in this. Her hand is not like this. Her hand is kind of like this, and it's hard to get my hand because my ring finger wants to do what my pinky finger doesn't want to do. But anyway, the bullet comes in like this, goes through this ring finger, and then comes right across here, and then continues on.
Okay. And why don't you, I'll be your your dummy, okay?
Okay.
Go ahead and use this area and position the hand the way that at least one of the variations where how the hands and the fingers have to be spread so that we receive this type of injury.
Okay, so her hand is somewhat, somewhat right here. Maybe we step back a little bit more. It's here, and I believe that her pinky finger's bent a little bit like this, so the bullet comes in, goes through this finger, scrapes the top of that finger, and then goes into Mr. Oulson's chest. But her hand could be on his chest. I can't tell if it's, and I think her wrist is a little bit down like this. It's coming up because the stippling is mostly here. So her hand could be here, could be on his chest. I can't really tell exactly. From a forensic pathology context, it's best to consider where her hand would be according to what she said, what other people say, and what the environment dictates. But again, anywhere in here are anatomically and scientifically possible. But you have to take that in context.
Let's go ahead and couple that with, can you share with this, the next photograph. I'll let you orientate it because we were talking about stippling, and you believe State's Exhibit number 16 will assist you in describing your testimony.
Again, this is her hand held like this.
I'll hold this way.
Okay. Her left hand. There's the bullet wound. And I thought this depicted the stippling. This is quite obviously stippling. It's 2 days delayed. It looks a little different than it would on somebody that's freshly stippled. 2 days delayed, but it's still there, and it's going to take a long time for it to wear off, if ever. You may actually have permanent tattooing there. This is much more dispersed than on the decedent's wrist, which indicates to me most likely her hand was behind his wrist.
Here, you can adjust.
Yes. If his wrist is here, her hand is somewhere in here. Okay? It's not over here and his hand's there. I've got much more intense stippling here, and then I've got less stippling here. It's my scientific opinion that it's closer to, her hand is closer to the husband than his own hand is to himself.
Okay. You have a seat, please. I'd like to go back to the gunshot wound to the chest. You indicated to us earlier, basically front to back with just a slight deviation. Is that correct?
Right. It comes in right just to the left of the midline and then ends up, one of the pieces ends up a little bit to the right of the midline, while the jacket is pretty much right underneath in line with the wound.
From the path of the projectile through the body, can you make a determination the variations that the body could be in that would be consistent with that trajectory?
Yes.
Would using a rod help you do that?
Yes.
Your Honor, may we approach on objection?
Yes. Welcome to do so as well.
Okay.
And just be back in 10 minutes. Thank you.